There's much more to leading worship than just picking great songs and leading a team through a rehearsal and making excellent arrangements. At the end of the day, one of the most important things you're going to be doing is working with other people. And so assessment of personality, self-awareness, and interpersonal communications are super important. When it comes to personality types and assessments, there are quite a few that are out there, and most of us are pretty familiar with these. These have become pretty popular over the years. The oldest one was the Myers-Briggs, 1921 is when it was started. Taylor-Johnson is another extensive personality analysis that identified 9 basic personality traits. Another one is the DISC assessment that identified 4 basic personality categories: dominance, influence, steadiness, and compliance. And you'll see those 4 categories appear again in the color code to some extent, although it comes at it from a different angle of motivations. There are people that are motivated by power, others by the pursuit of fun, some that desire to be at peace with others, others by intimacy. So Motivations and Motive Matters is the organization that administers the color code. And then more recently, we've had the Enneagram, and you can take an entire seminar in that here at OCC in the spring with Dr. Wood. And many of you are familiar with the Enneagrams as well, the 9 basic types. Another factor that comes into play often is birth order and personality, and there's research that shows that firstborn children have advantages in certain ways. Parents treat them differently because they're first, they're novices at being parents, and so there are certain characteristics that tend to cluster with firstborns, with middle children, and with younger children. So knowing the birth order of the members of your team is helpful in learning some things about personality. But I want to land on one that I found. This is super easy. It's one that I've used in premarital counseling and marriage counseling because it's so simple and intuitive and memorable. And it's basically the animal test. Which animal are you? I know this doesn't seem very scientific, but these 4 animal types that Smalley refers to in this test really take us back to the DISC and the color code, and they're rooted in those basic personality types that each one of us tend to have. So at this point, I would like for you to take a little personality test. You will find it attached in the course documents, and simply go through there and circle the traits that describe you as you are in your natural inclinations, knowing that in certain circumstances you can behave in different ways. But I want to get at what is your natural resting position. And you circle those and then write the score down at the bottom. And then pause the video, do that test, and then come back. All right, the animal test tells us that we're basically one of these 4 types of animals with some overlap. There's the lion personality. That's the typical dominant leader, take charge, my way kind of person. Then you have, in contrast to that, the otter. That is fun-loving, outgoing, energized by people, and always is asking the question, how can we make it fun? Then you have the retriever, the loyal one who is all about intimacy, relationship, and connection. And in contrast to that, you have the beaver, and the beaver is hardworking, industrious, perfectionist, compliant in the sense of they are a rule follower, there are procedures, there are ways of doing things. This personality can tend towards perfectionism. So which one of those are you? I will tell you that I'm somewhere between a retriever and a beaver. Both of those dominate in my personality, as well as when I take the color code, I'm a white-blue, and that's the correspondence here, white and blue with the retriever beaver. So those are very helpful. I found this too in marriage counseling to identify what your core personality type is. It's helpful for many reasons. So why would we want to know our personality types? Number one, it's very important just for our own self-awareness. It helps to identify our strengths and our weaknesses. For example, my strength as a retriever is that I'm loyal. I'm a good friend. I'll stick with you. I'm sensitive, compassionate, thoughtful, empathetic. All those things are strengths. The weakness of that is I can avoid conflict because I don't want to ruffle any feathers. I want everyone to like me. I am insecure and don't take criticism well. Those are kinds of the things that can happen when you have that type of personality. So strengths and weaknesses, that's helpful to know. Not that you have to succumb to those weaknesses, but it just tells you this is what you've got to constantly be aware of and be working against. These personality type tests also show us how others perceive us, what others think of us. In fact, if you look at that document that you downloaded on the personality test, you'll see on the backside there is a list of how other people might perceive you. So you might think of yourself as fun-loving, an otter type. Everyone loves you, but really people might find you annoying. You might talk too much, etc. So there's always the flip side, the dark side of personality as well. So it's important to be aware of how others might perceive us. Second, it really helps us in the area of decision making because each one of these four personalities will tend to make decisions in a different way. So the lion personality is authoritative and say, this is it. This is how we're going to do it. Okay, this is how we're doing it. The otter might say, well, this is how I feel right now. I think this would be fun. Let's try this. The retriever might be more collaborative and say, well, what do you think? Let's take a vote. And then the beaver might say, well, what's the most rational thing to do here? What do the rules say? What's the most logical, reasonable thing to do? So each one of those personalities takes a different approach to decision making. So that's super critical when you're working together in a group. Finally, personality types reveal how we communicate. For example, a lion might be very direct and just order you and tell you what you need to do. The otter, being more relational, might try to persuade you through peer pressure, through, hey, well, everyone's doing it. Let's all do this. Everyone's doing it. The retriever might be a little more indirect. Rather than telling you to do something, they might form it in a question. Well, hey, why don't we try this? Or have you thought about doing this? The beaver would just say, well, here's the facts. Here's my PowerPoint presentation and my 4 bullet points of why this needs to be done. Okay, so each one of these personalities tend to a different type of decision-making process and a different type of communication process. So knowing who you are and who your team members are helps you in relating to them in all those different ways. So super important. At some point in a team's life, I think it's important to do some kind of personality assessment. I like the animal test, because it is so easy and memorable. Secondly, you need to get to know your team. So know their personality, but then just know their team, not just their personality, but their communication style, the ways they want to grow in their relationship with God, their struggles, their spiritual gifts, their family, their history. Getting to know them is super important. If you don't do this, your ministry, I promise you, will be short-lived. Because you can be super talented musically and check all the boxes there, but if you can't work with people, you're not going to last very long. You're not going to be happy. The people you work with are not going to be happy. So how do you learn these things? Well, love is spelled T-I-M-E, right? You spend time with them and you do these things. You observe, you become a people watcher. You see how people interact with one another, things they say, things they do. Body language. You ask questions of them. That's one of the best things I have learned as an introvert is to be a question asker. I don't have to be the center of the conversation. I don't have to lead the conversation. I can just ask questions and let other people talk. So ask questions. And then assessments, things like the personality assessment or spiritual gifts inventory, those types of things. Why is this important? Well, it's your job to be a pastor. A pastor is a shepherd, and so shepherds know their sheep. This is your number one job. It's really more important than anything else that you do, and that is how you care for members of your team. Some practical ways to do this. Well, first, let's say why. Help the team get to know one another so they can help one another. One thing you realize is, as a leader, you can't do it all. There's just too much. And so if you can help your team members to know one another, they can support one another. They can pastor one another and share the burden around. Secondly, they can worship more freely because they trust and feel comfortable with one another. I've been in situations where there has been a lack of trust on a team for various reasons. And it just is devastating when you really don't don't trust the person next to you on stage or the person who is operating the sound console. You don't have that level of trust. You start to behave differently around them and other people, and it just tends to undermine everything. And then we want to do this because we're leaders. We're on the stage in front of the congregation, and a congregation can sense if there is tension. They can read the body language. 90% of our communication is nonverbal, and if there's tension between individuals on stage, people will notice it. Some practical ways for doing this. One is just to be in a Bible study, do community together, and have things that are outside of the rehearsal where you're building a relationship. Schedule time before or after rehearsal for prayer, for devotional thought, and make that a non-negotiable. That you will be here, we'll come 15 minutes early for this, or we'll stay 15 minutes late for this, and don't compromise on that. Take time to worship as a team that's not part of your normal rehearsal. I just can't tell you how sweet it is to gather at someone's home or around a campfire and just to worship as a team, not because you're on stage or you're performing in any sense, but just have some genuine worship together. Go on retreats together. There's a local retreat called the Respond Worship Retreat that was started several years ago to serve local congregations in this very area. So create something like that. Just take your own retreat if you can, or team up with some other churches to do this. Then, of course, conferences, which gives you opportunity to take road trips together. There's just nothing better than spending time in a van on a trip for this kind of thing. And then, of course, you want to use the knowledge that you have of your team members to serve them. A quote that I heard early on in ministry was this: "A servant is someone who gets excited about making someone else successful." Well, that's what I have dedicated my life to. I want to make other people successful. I want to step into the background while they step into the spotlight. And if you exhibit that kind of servant leadership, you'll be successful. I'm confident of that. I've experienced that. Invest in people. Invest in relational capital. This is an incredibly valuable resource. So make it your goal to serve others. Jesus set the example by washing the feet of his disciples. Secondly, rely on God's help, which means pray for them regularly. One thing you realize in ministry is that you can't help everyone all the time in every way. You've got to lean on God, and to do that means taking people before the Father in prayer, interceding for them. Do follow up on hopes and fears that they've expressed. When they've shared something with you that they're struggling with, follow up. Ask them about that. Ask them how they're doing with that in the days and weeks to follow. Pray for people on the spot. If they share something, just stop right there and pray for them. Nothing communicates your love and concern for them than to pray for them in that moment. Ask questions and listen to know what's really going on. Know your own strengths and weaknesses. Just because you aren't strong in a particular area doesn't mean you shouldn't seek to lead in those areas of your team. So I want to be careful here to say this, that, for example, by nature, I'm an introvert, and I'm not, I don't seek to be in front of people. I don't seek to be up on the stage. And yet that's what God's called me to do. And so I've leaned into that and done that in my entire ministry life, even though it's not something that by personality I'm driven to do. So don't use any personality weaknesses or doubts that you might have to keep you from leading. If you do feel deficient in some area, invite someone else to help you out. Don't let your pride get in the way here, but ask someone to help you out. I love the quote from Harry S. Truman, who said, "It's amazing what you can do if you don't care who gets the credit." See, and that's the problem with so much of politics, is concerned about who gets the credit. Instead, just focus on getting the job done, whatever it takes. Don't be insecure. Ask for help. Consider the example of Moses. Don't have time to read this whole passage, but you know the story. Moses, 80 years old, you'd think he'd be equipped for leadership, but he had so many doubts. In fact, he had 5 questions that he asked of God, 5 doubts that he expressed. You know what? God answered every single one of them. So don't be crippled by your insecurity. Learn from Moses, this great leader who found strength in God to lead. And finally, just some quick tips on coaching a team. First, see yourself as a pastor of the team. You've heard this before, but people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I know it's a cliche, but it's true. Let them know how much you care. Second, empower people. Know when to let go and what to let go of. You always be doing this. Always be looking around and seeing what people can do that you're currently doing, and let what you're doing go to them so you can do something else. Always don't just get locked into, hey, this is what I do, this is who I am. Always be looking for ways to delegate, to share, and empower other people. Communicate well. Over communicate. I mean, if copy people on emails if necessary, respond to text, respond to emails, phone calls, voice messages as soon as possible. Ideally within 24 hours, you will develop a reputation as someone who cares just by doing that. 6 till it sticks just means so you got to say something 6 times in 6 different ways before it finally sticks. So over communicate. In case of conflict, try to create win-win scenarios. Assume the best intention in others. Try to create win-wins, and always be training your replacement. Always look around you for people that you can mentor, that you can pour into, because you don't know how long God has you in a particular place or role, and so you've always got people looking up to you, just as you are always looking up to someone else. So there you go, some helps for interpersonal communication and personality.